All right, part three of our Guernsey series. We'll be talking about Platte Pipeline today, Enbridge's Platte Pipeline. Before we get started, some housekeeping items quickly. As a reminder, I will be in Houston for the months of September and October. If you're interested in meeting up face to face, let me know. We can schedule time. Happy to come out and visit anyone in their office, showing you what we're planning on doing, what we're doing, and what we have so far on our analytics platform. What else? If you want to beta test, reach out. We're still taking beta testers. You can see what we're doing. I think it's very helpful if you're looking at crude supply and demand markets, want to see what the flows on certain pipelines look like. Let us know. Happy to have more beta testers. Without further ado, let's get into part three of Guernsey. I mentioned we'll be talking about Platte, so I'll switch over to the map view here. I'm going to do a quick reminder of what we talked about in part one and part two. Part one was actually like 3 months ago when I talked about the Cheyenne pipeline. So that video was about 3 months ago, and I talked about how Plains had bought the 50% interest that they didn't own in this pipeline, and they hinted in their Q1 call that they would be potentially pushing more volumes down this pipe. As you can see, it's not fully utilized, or as of Q1 wasn't fully utilized. We don't have Q2 data yet to see what that looks like, but they did hint during that call that they thought they could push more volumes down that pipeline. As a reminder, that pipeline largely would flow into Cowboy Pipeline, which is a connection to Saddlehorn, and Saddlehorn actually has a lease on that pipeline. So you would be flowing down Saddlehorn, the northern portion of the lease that they have on Cowboy, the northern portion of Saddlehorn, and then you could get to Platteville. So from Platteville, they could take Saddlehorn, although I have mentioned that Saddlehorn is full. So those volumes would likely go to another egress DJ pipeline. That could be White Cliffs and potentially some others. So the theme here is for this three-part series is, hey, there's a lot of open capacity potentially opening up at Guernsey, and flow changes in the market, or supply and demand changes in the market that may impact flows in Guernsey and open up a lot of space out of Guernsey. So part one, again, Cheyenne pipeline flowing out of Guernsey and increased space, or space that's open there that Plains may market quite a bit more aggressively on. Part two, we talked about Suncor's pipeline, the Rocky Mountain pipeline, and how they just completed a replacement project, which actually twinned a good portion of this pipeline from Cheyenne south. So this north piece already had excess capacity on it, but the twin that they did, and actually a boost from a 10-inch pipeline going this length into a 16-inch pipeline, opened up a lot of capacity. So as you can see here in the graph, and we actually do have Q2 data on this one, they are not pushing significantly more volumes down this pipe as of Q2. That would likely require a connection here. So they do have the connection to get barrels from the DJ area, Platteville specifically, into their Fort Lupton station here to bring down to the refinery. If they wanted to push significantly more volumes down this pipeline, the refinery is only 100,000 barrels a day. They would actually need to probably reverse this or make it bidirectional or get a connection of some sort to get those barrels to Platteville. I don't believe they've done that yet, and the flows would reiterate that they haven't done that yet. Okay, so again, a lot of potential excess space here that Suncor could sell their older pipeline if it's still able to be sold. It is an old pipeline. They could push more volumes down this. They could push third-party volumes down this, which could potentially open up more space out of Guernsey and take more barrels out of Guernsey. All right, so let's do a quick deep dive on Platte. It's not a terribly complicated pipeline, but we'll do a deep dive on it and talk about why it may have some space opening up here in the future as well. And I touched on it on a different video, but I think it's good to give it its own video because I do think it's a pretty big change and could have significant ramifications for the Guernsey Hub and other hubs as well. Okay, so Platte Pipeline, origin point at Casper, this is going to be largely taking volumes from Express Pipeline coming down from Canada, coming down from Montana. So Express Pipeline owned by Enbridge as well. They do have a joint tariff all the way to Wood River Refinery. We'll get there eventually. But a lot of volumes do flow into Casper here. The volumes flow further to Guernsey. So Guernsey, they can actually deliver or receive here as well. So they're getting some barrels from Casper, they're getting some barrels from Guernsey. I can't tell you how much at each location, but there's a fair amount at Casper, and I would guess they pick up some at Guernsey as well. I can't tell you exactly how much. But if we look at the flows at the state border, we can look at that. You've seen these tail off over the last, let's call it, couple of years, which is interesting as they've talked about expanding Express, expanding Platte, and pushing more Canadian volumes down this pipeline. That could still happen, but I would note there is and has been some space available out of Wyoming on Platte over the last couple of years, which is interesting. A lot of people don't know this, and I didn't know this until I really looked at this pipeline in depth, but this pipeline actually drops barrels in Nebraska here. It also drops barrels in Missouri here. So the connection here is at Holdridge, and this is connecting into Jayhawk Pipeline. This is this pipeline owned by CHS. And CHS is taking these volumes presumably to their McPherson refinery here. It looks like volumes could potentially connect down into El Dorado's refinery, also here as well. So those two refineries are taking barrels off of Platte. So if we just look at the flows here, you can see it's right around 20,000 barrels a day typically is coming off of Platte in Nebraska and then flowing down to these refineries in Kansas, those CHS refineries in Kansas. So the barrels that don't get dropped there, again, just going back to what the flows were, we're talking about, well, let's call it close to 100,000 barrels a day, maybe a little over 100,000 barrels a day coming out of Wyoming. About 20,000 barrels a day is dropped in Nebraska, which makes its way down to these Kansas refineries. And then a little bit is dropped in Missouri as well. So this is where we start to get into some of the important stuff. So this is dropping into Enbridge's as well, their Spearhead Pipeline. So I think it's about 5,000 barrels a day gets dropped here, and then it makes its way to Cushing. So 100,000 barrels a day coming out of Wyoming, 20,000 in Nebraska, 5,000 here. The rest make it to the Wood River Refinery, where I presume that they're being taken in by the Wood River Refinery there and being refined. So that's a lay of the pipeline. Now, what's interesting about this pipe, and we've talked about it a few times before, and it's not a huge project, so maybe like, hey, what's the big deal? But the Southern Illinois Connector, the joint project pitched by Enbridge and Energy Transfer, could potentially change flows significantly with this pipeline and around this area. So I'm just going to turn on to be able to draw here. And actually, before we draw, let's look at what Spearhead does. And just a reminder of what Spearhead does. This is a pipeline that's taking barrels from Flanagan. So these will be Canadian barrels probably, some heavy barrels. There might be some light barrels mixed in. And it's taking it to Cushing here. So it's flowing from Illinois to Cushing. And this has been under a long-term contract for a long time. It's stayed relatively full. And what's been surprising is the Southern Illinois Connector Project, as disclosed by Enbridge in their last earnings call, they stated that they were going to switch the flow direction to go here and then dump into Key, this is the Key terminal here, into Platte, and then flow back this way. Now, these barrels aren't going to Wood River. They would build a connection here to get to Patoka, and then they would take ETCOP down to the Gulf Coast, and as they noted, once they get to the Gulf Coast, potentially to some Louisiana refineries. My presumption, it would be Bayou Bridge that would take those barrels. I think they're heavy barrels, so I doubt they'd go down Permian Express, but that's also an option. If you want to look at the map on that, this ETCOP does cross right over Permian Express, so that's also an option. But I think it would be down Bayou Bridge. But what's interesting about this, and let me just switch back to my cursor here, is if you're going to switch the flows, so if you're going to take the flows that were going from Flanagan to Cushing and you're going to shift those, or a good amount of those, it sounds like, to go down to Wood River and then over to Patoka and then down to the Gulf Coast, it opens up all this capacity on the southern line of Spearhead. So again, I think this is 200,000 barrels a day. Yeah, roughly 200,000 barrels a day of capacity. And a good portion of this, depending on how much they got, let me clear this out, how much they got contracted, how much they get contracted, if they even get any contracted on Southern Illinois Connector, how much space would open up here. I would guess it'd be a fair amount. So if we just assume maybe 100,000 barrels a day shifts over to Southern Illinois Connector, that's 100,000 barrels a day lopped off of the volumes flowing down the southern part of Spearhead. So it would create a lot of capacity here, and you already have capacity here. So why not get more aggressive and start to flow some barrels from Guernsey? So the trek to Guernsey down to here is something, this is a route that is not popular. Like I said, 5,000 barrels a day is being dumped here. If you look at there is no committed joint tariff on this route, so it'd be largely an uncommitted rate. It's about $6 today. The going rate for barrels out of Guernsey here, out of Guernsey down like Pony Express is about $2.50 to $3. So they would have to lower the rates, which I think that they would do. If you have roughly 100,000 barrels a day of open capacity on your pipelines, that you could potentially compete with some of the other pipelines out of Guernsey. I don't know why you wouldn't do that and try to go low potentially and be competitive and try to fill up your pipeline and get more revenue. Again, this open space is wasted if you're just going to leave it open. So if there's the potential to pump more oil and be competitive and steal some volumes, if you can, you should do that. I would also note that they are planning to expand Express coming this way, so that would add more supply, which would help that. They wouldn't necessarily be stealing barrels from anyone, but this is what I wanted to highlight with the zone video, because I think this is pretty important. We don't know the fate of Southern Illinois Connectors project. We don't know if it'll even get done, but if it does get done, I would look for Enbridge to get more aggressive with this route and potentially go low on rates, maybe something like $2 to get to Cushing or something like that, which would obviously put some pressure on some of the other pipelines, Pony Express, and potentially Saddlehorn out of this area. So that's a good summary. I'll keep it short today. I know some people don't like the super long videos. So again, I just want to reiterate, reach out to us. I'll be in Houston. I'm happy to come in and see everyone. Thank you to everyone who continues to give us feedback. It's very helpful. And I hope everyone has a great weekend, and we will talk to you next week sometime, and I'll have at least one more video next week. Thanks.